The real takeaway from me from Halloween Havoc on Sunday night or Saturday night, whenever it was, I think it was Saturday night, the real takeaway from me was the video package for the returning Dominik Dijakovic, Dijak, whatever you want to call him, formerly known as, went by T-Bar in Retribution. This guy never really got a fair shake in WWE. Now, in NXT, he had a pretty good run. He was signed 5 years ago, if you can believe it, in the fall of 2017. And the only reason why I remember when he was signed was because WWE at that point was big in acquisition mode, even more so then than they were at any other point. From 2017 to 2018, WWE signed a lot of fucking people to NXT. When I say they, I mean Triple H. Triple H signed a lot of people to NXT. And Dominik was one of them. They had just signed Leo Rush. They had signed Adam Cole, Bobby Fish, Kyle O'Reilly, among others. And they weren't slowing down. Dominik was one of them. Keith Lee had signed the following year in 2018. But I had followed Dominik's career in Ring of Honor. He was pretty big here in the Northeast scene in late 2016, 2015. So he made a name for himself in the Northeast wrestling scene as well. And I was excited to see him in WWE. Went to NXT. Didn't really find his footing as a character. I don't even think he debuted on TV, made his official debut. He wrestled a few matches here and there on television in the summer of 2018. Didn't debut as Dominik Dijakovic until late 2018 and didn't really start rolling until 2019. And the matches with Keith Lee on NXT really put him on the map. He had some great matches down there with Keith Lee, Damian Priest, Karrion Kross, among others. And he was only on NXT TV full-time consistently for about a year. Not really that long. And after that, obviously, he got called up to the main roster. And there were rumblings in early 2020 around COVID that he was going to be called up by Paul Heyman, because Paul Heyman, I think, was high on him, because Paul Heyman was writing Raw at the time. He was in charge of Raw, creative, whatever. And then Heyman gets fired. So instead, they do bring him up to the main roster, but he gets thrown into that awful Retribution faction, which was fucking terrible. Everyone involved was worse off. Shane Thorne was in there. He got fired. Mia Yim was in there. She got fired. Mercedes Martinez was in there. She got fired. Mustafa Ali is still struggling to kind of rebound from that awful group. And then he was one of the members as well. And Mace was also in there, and he's on SmackDown now as Mace. I guess it's better than not being on TV at all. But anyway, as far as Dominik went, the guy is an amazing athlete. Didn't really have a chance to showcase his skills to the main roster audience. Retribution died a death by early last year. And he's remained on TV as a single star. He and Mace were still a tag team. He's still going by T-Bar. It's funny because at Halloween Havoc in that vignette, he was wearing he wasn't wearing the dumb mask, but he took off the mask that he was wearing as T-Bar and threw it in the fire. Now, the interesting thing is that I think that was meant to kind of clarify before they aired the other vignette on NXT on Tuesday that it was for the former T-Bar. The funny thing is that he hasn't been T-Bar as far as, he's been T-Bar ever since Retribution started, but he hasn't worn the mask in about a year or so now. He took off the mask a while ago. He's been wearing face paint, or I think he's been wearing face paint or whatever for a little bit now, and he's only been really wrestling on main event. Hasn't had any singles matches on Raw, I don't think. He's made the occasional appearance in Battle Royals and stuff like that, but hasn't had a singles match on Raw in quite some time. It was then reported by PW Insider over the summer that Triple H was considering repackaging him. And thank God they did. And honestly, putting him back in NXT isn't a bad move. Because honestly, if they brought him right back to Raw immediately, people would remember the T-Bar shit, and he doesn't look all that different. He would have had to attack a top star on the main roster for people to take him seriously. I think rehabbing him first in NXT is a smart call. Because then once he gets going and has a good run there, hopefully, then he can make his way back to Raw or SmackDown. A lot like with Finn Balor. Now, Finn Balor was not nearly as close to being as damaged goods as T-Bar was, as Dominik Dijakovic was when he left for NXT in late 2019. But going back to NXT really allowed him to rebuild momentum, get his stock back up, have some awesome matches. That's what I'm hoping for Dominik. Now, Apollo Crews hasn't lit the world on fire by any means in NXT. He's been better off in NXT lately compared to where he was on the card earlier this year on the main roster with Commander Aziz, like anyone gives a fuck. But he's had a good run so far in NXT. If Dominik can have as good of a run as Apollo, if not better, I have a lot of faith that he can be rebuilt and be a star in the main roster. Now, I'm not talking world champion, but the guy is good enough for a guy his size, and his mic skills are still, not the greatest. that I think he can be something on the main roster. So I'm hoping for the best for him in NXT. The guy's very talented. It was never really given a fair shot on the main roster to begin with many years ago as part of the whole retribution bullshit. So I've got my fingers crossed that these video packages will bring him back to NXT TV as Dominik Dijakovic, not a new fucking name. And Dominik Dijakovic isn't even really that's not his real name anyway. His real name is Chris Dijak, which is honestly cooler. His name in the Ring of Honor was Donovan Dijak, which is less of a mouthful than Dominik Dijakovic. But I still think he can be something of value on the main roster if booked properly, so time will tell.